Commissioner Goins, can you hear me? I take that as a no. Commissioner Goins, can you hear me? I can't hear him. Can you text Jonathan? I was unable to hear him. I don't have my text. Oh, hand me my phone.
Ms. Bradshaw, is everything set up with Mr. Goins? Can he hear and be heard?
He was able to hear me, but I was not able to hear him. So I'm trying to make sure.
Okay.
Commissioner Goins, can you try again? I was unable to hear you. There, you should be able to see him now. Commissioner Goins, can you hear myself? Chairman Lau, can you see if he can hear you?
Commissioner Goins, can you hear me? We cannot hear you.
I don't know.
We cannot hear you still.
I think Commissioner Goins logged out and he might try back.
Can you add me to the meeting?
I did.
I'm just going to check something.
I just did.
Recording in progress.
Check,
Says he's
check, check. Check, check. Check, 1, 2, 1, 2.
I can't tell if I can hear you.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Oh, nope, only on the phone. I can only hear him through the phone. He's not coming through here.
Try it again.
You want?
Can you try to say something?
Sorry,
We-
Commissioner
we
Goins,
sort
we're
of-
having some technical difficulties.
We could tell you were making noises, but we couldn't. It wasn't loud enough to understand what you're saying. Does he know sign language?
So he came through.
It's just not coming on our end.
Yeah.
Should I mute the city meeting? Or mute me? I didn't think so.
Tell him to do a test again.
I'm sorry, Commissioner Goins, can you try testing again?
Can you hear me now?
I can sort of hear you, but you're not coming through quite loud enough.
Is the volume on the computer?
Or mute off on my computer?
That might be why.
Okay. Try one more time.
Can you hear me now?
Yes,
That's
thank
it.
you.
We're good. All right, sorry about that. You're ready to get started.
All right. The Planning Commission meeting for Wednesday, July 6, 2022 is called to order. Would you rise with me for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Mr. Attorney, do we have a quorum?
Yes, Madam Chair.
Thank you. We do have one commissioner joining us virtually, and so during this meeting, a designated staff person will run the Zoom aspect so that each commissioner can focus on the meeting, not the technology. If at any time during the meeting the commission member gets disconnected, the meeting will briefly pause to give him time to return. All matters requiring commission action shall be presented to the Planning Commission by planning staff and the applicant. In situations where planning staff is the applicant, there will be only one presentation. To maintain an orderly meeting, all presentations shall proceed without interruption unless the commission desires to intervene with questions or comments. The chair will open a public hearing for those physically present wishing to speak about an item. Those in favor of an item shall be heard first, followed by those who are opposed to an item. A 10-minute time limit will be allowed for public comment in favor. Another 10-minute time limit will be allowed for public comment in opposition to an item. A staff member will track the 10-minute time period. Who's our timekeeper tonight? Mr. Satterfield, thank you. And will raise their hand at the 5-minute mark, the 1-minute mark, and then verbally call time when it expires. The chair, in their discretion, may extend these time periods. The public has been encouraged to submit their comments in writing via a web-based form located on the city's website. All comments received before 3 p.m. today were forwarded unedited to the Planning Commission. All comments received will be delivered also to the City Council when the item advances. All comments received will be made available to the public if requested. All votes will be roll call votes unless otherwise indicated after proper motions are made and consistency statements are read into the record. The chair will state the outcome of the vote and the action. Rezoning requests that received an unfavorable recommendation from the Planning Commission may be appealed by the applicant to the Wilmington City Council. Appeals should be in the form of a letter submitted to the city clerk within 10 days of this hearing. Any appeals and all items approved tonight will be heard tentatively at the August 2nd, 2022 City Council meeting. All right, Commissioners, you had the minutes from June 1st in your packet. Are there any questions or corrections?
I make a motion, we accept the minutes as written and as submitted for today's meeting.
Thank you. Commissioner Pollack has moved to approve the minutes from June 1st. Do we have a second?
Second.
Great. We have a second by Commissioner Sharp, and we will do a voice vote on this one. All in favor of approving the minutes of June 1st? Say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Say nay. Thank you. The minutes for June 1st, 2022 are approved. Under our old business, we have a Land Development Code amendment to amend the City Code, Chapter 18, Section 18-157, pertaining to short-term lodging regulations to align with recent case law and statutory allowances governing such uses. And our staff presentation is Ms. Catherine Thurston. Welcome.
Good evening, Madam Chair and members of the Planning Commission. I know that you are all aware of the 3-year-long process that the city went through to adopt these regulations, but I'll go through a little bit of the background just for the benefit of anyone from the public who may be listening. So there was a 3-year public input period and multiple public meetings before City Council adopted regulations governing short-term lodging uses that went into effect March 1st, 2019. That ordinance established a 400-foot separation between uses, a 2% cap on all residential dwelling units that were allowed to be short-term lodging, limited the use to certain districts, established parking requirements, prohibited parties or large groups, set forth basic operational requirements related to nuisance and safety and insurance requirements, and it established a lottery for the initial registration, which included a 1-year amortization period for any existing operators to cease operations if they weren't awarded a registration through the lottery process. And this is a very brief timeline of all that the Planning Commission and City Council and City staff worked through to get those regulations in place. The amortization period from the date of the lottery, which was April 15th, 2019, went until April 22nd, 2020. On April 23rd, in April of 2020, City staff sent a letter to operators whose amortization period was ending to inform them of the need to discontinue their use. Subsequent to that, we received several appeals. Most notably was the Schroeder appeal. And the final decision in that appeal is the basis behind the ordinance amendments that are before you today. The entirety of the relevant statutory reference that's in front of you right now, that's 160D-1207 subsection C. That's included as attachment 1 in your case packet. But generally, that section limits local government authority on registration and permitting for residential rental units. I'm not going to read all of that for you. But based on that statutory guidance and the court decision from the Schroeder appeal, several of the elements of the city's ordinance were stricken, including the 400-foot separation between uses and the 2% cap, and also the permitting requirement. So the amendment that's before you today is just to align the city's ordinances with that statutory requirement, and also the decision in the case from the North Carolina Court of Appeals. So I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have with regard to the amendment. We also have legal staff available to answer any questions that you may have pertaining to the case itself.
Thank you, Ms. Thurston. Commissioners, do you have any questions for staff? Commissioner Pollack?
Catherine, just one quick question. The phrase Airbnb, where does that fit in all these? Does that fit in the bed and breakfast lodging, set of
Generally,
text, or where does that fit?
Yeah, generally Airbnbs operate as whole house short-term lodging, but they can be just rooms within a house, which would be classified as a homestay.
Okay,
But Airbnb is just one of the platforms that operators use to put their product out for the public.
okay, thank you.
Commissioner Lennon?
Thank you for that explanation. So on this slide, does that mean that the items that are not crossed out will still be in effect,
Yes, sir.
those regulations? Okay.
Yes. The court upheld those elements of the ordinance.
Okay. So we still have an ordinance with those controls in place?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
The most probably important thing that was stricken is the permitting requirement and the 400-foot separation between the uses. The 2% cap was unlikely to come into play much anyway.
Thank you.
Commissioner Woodruff?
Question, the 400-foot separation between uses. Explain to me why that doesn't apply to bed and breakfast.
Well, we have legal staff on hand to correct me if I go off the rails here, but my understanding is that the purpose of this amendment this evening is to correct deficiencies identified as part of the decision from the North Carolina Court of Appeals, which did not consider bed and breakfasts, and it is a different use. It's a different classification in our land development code, and it's a different statutory definition as well.
So it's been run by legal counsel.
Yes, it was considered by staff and our legal counsel, and they even took it to outside counsel for them to weigh in on the, whether or not we should consider changing that section of the ordinance.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Sharp?
I see on that it is allowed under certain zoning districts. How would staff or neighbors know that they were there?
Well, it's allowed in some capacity in all districts except for the mobile home park district. Part of the rationale behind that is that within mobile home park districts, ownership is typically of just the unit itself and not the underlying land or property. So there were some concerns with insurance and safety and that sort of, and also just owners giving permission for that use of their property. There was also some affordable housing element considered when deciding not to allow short-term lodging in the mobile home park district. In residential and commercial districts, we allow both the whole house and homestay lodging within properly permitted, which means legal dwelling units. In commercial districts, we do not allow the ground floor to be used for short-term lodging, and that's just to preserve the commercial nature of the district.
So to follow up, thank you. To follow up, how would a neighbor, let's say in the historic district, know whether a nearby property was being used as a short-term rental?
Well, as of right now, we do still have information on which units are being used for short-term lodging. And we have this map here. This is the most recent map that we have showing all of the short-term lodging uses in the city. In the future, if a neighbor is wanting to, for instance, complain about some kind of nuisance use, or say that the neighbor doesn't have the requisite parking or something along those lines, we would need to do our own investigation to figure out whether or not they're operating short-term lodging.
But since there is no registration, this map will eventually be redundant or no longer applicable?
We
And so
are already no longer using it as a permitting tool.
I understand that. So really for a neighbor or a resident, it's really an unknown commodity unless there's a problem, unless someone inquires.
Yes, sir. And that's not completely atypical from the way that most zoning regulations are evaluated and enforced.
Fine, thank you.
Any commissioners, any other questions for staff at this time? Commissioner Woodruff?
Just real quick, have you seen the comment that came in today from the person that kept referring to the policy in Asheville?
Was that the one that related to the placement of windows on two-story buildings?
No, that was the PowerPoint. Another one came in, I guess, sometime today, but it was I don't even remember if it was a gentleman or a lady, but just kept referring to the one in Asheville's working, why can't we do that? And I have no clue about what's in Asheville. I just didn't know if that's something totally different than what we're doing or tried to do.
My understanding is that the Asheville ordinance is currently being evaluated for consistency with our court case.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Thurston.
Thank you.
All right, at this time, we'll open the public hearing for agenda item number 1. Is anyone here to speak in favor of agenda item number 1? Okay. Anyone here to speak in opposition of agenda item number 1? Welcome to the podium, and start with your name and your address, and make sure you've signed in with Smith Bradshaw.
Greetings, Planning Commission members. I did sign in. My name is Joe Pollack. My address is 302 South 2nd Street in downtown Wilmington. And it's amazing that we've reached this point, because for all of the battles that raged over this issue, it's like a whisper at this point, which is to me really tragic, because Basically, this zoning ordinance is going to turn STRs loose in the city of Wilmington. I am a 32-year homeowner, resident, and neighbor in Wilmington's downtown HDR, Historic District Residential. Over the years, downtown residents have worked very hard to build a community of neighbors. This community is greatly threatened by whole house short-term rentals. And to Mr. Pollack's question, there's a homestay, which is where you rent out a room, but you still have a neighbor. And then there's a whole house short-term rental, which is, the house has basically been turned into a hotel suite, and it can be owned by an LLC. And there is now going to be no control over, within residential districts, over whether that takes place, except for the point I'm getting to. Residential zoning is supposed to protect us from business uses in residential districts. An LLC operating a daily rental hotel suite in a single-family home, I think you can all agree, is a business use. While many residential neighborhoods in Wilmington are protected from this problem by HOA, homeowner association covenants that forbid whole house STRs, the Historic District Residential is unique in that it predates HOAs, homeowner associations, or covenants. And so, this is unfair. Many new communities in the city are protected from whole house STRs, but we are not. Now, sadly, the HDR is the worst place for whole house STRs to proliferate because of the lack of off-street parking, the high density of housing units. Yet the HDR is the prime target of whole house STRs because of the HDR's, the Historic District Residential's proximity to wedding and event centers and downtown entertainment. And just an aside, before the restrictions went into place, they were proliferating. We had multiple housing units that became late-night party houses for the people who were attending weddings 2 blocks away. That's where you'd want these people to stay. You don't want them to get into cars and drive, right? So what a perfect situation. Just rent a house in the historic district. We already know the problems whole house STRs will create for our neighborhood from the years leading up to 2019 when City Council wisely restricted them. Beyond the negative effects of whole house STRs in residential neighborhoods, the proliferation of whole house STRs will negatively impact workforce housing in the city of Wilmington. Estimates of the number of STRs made by city staff in 2019 were over 1,800. Every home converted to a weekend hotel suite is one less home for an employed person and neighbor. Now, we understand that the zoning changes proposed today stem from the Schroeder lawsuit and, more importantly, from legislative restrictions that were imposed on NC municipalities, North Carolina municipalities. Nevertheless, Asheville's ban on whole house STRs have withstood these legal challenges, and they've Ms. Thurston just said that they were being reevaluated. That process has already occurred, and Asheville's restrictions have stood. We ask that you impose the same restrictions on whole house STRs in residential districts as the city of Asheville, North Carolina. At a minimum, the unique circumstances of the HDR, the Historic District Residential, and those are parking, high density, proximity to the HDR, are reason enough to justify a ban on whole house STRs in the Historic District Residential. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Pollack. Is there anyone else here to speak against agenda item number 1? Anyone to speak on this item? Okay, the public hearing is closed. Would our council like to address any of the public hearing statements?
Good evening. I'm Deputy City Attorney Meredith Everhart. I think I've met most all of you. If you've got any specific questions, I'd be glad to answer them. I can let you know Asheville has made some changes to their legislation, to their requirements so far, but they are still evaluating any additional changes and where they're needed. And there also is beginning to be talk of litigation against cities who are not making changes to their programs that are similar to what Wilmington has. And so that has not occurred yet, but so we're kind of, our request at this point is to go forward with the exact changes that the court told us we had to make. And then in the future, I believe our office has met with Mr. Pollack previously, and we've explained to him that at this point, our recommendation is to do what the court has told us to do, and then wait and see how any additional litigation plays out. It's possible that the legislature may also step in and make some changes to change some of these rules, and we just don't know how all of that is going to go right now. So all we're asking you to do right now, and all we want City Council to do, is just change what we're doing to go with exactly what the court wanted us to do, and then we can reevaluate at a later date whether we want to make any additional changes. Does that help?
It does help, thank you. Commissioner Pollack?
Yeah, so let me make sure I understand it. We're looking at a set of changes as dictated by the court case. We really don't have an option. Is that my understanding from what you said?
Correct, and if you look at the court case which was provided to you in your packet, and then you look at the changes that we've made, I actually went through myself line by line through the court decision, and the court told us you have to take out this section. In this section you can keep this part, but you can't have that part. And so they were very specific and went through our ordinances with exactly what we had to do. And that is all that we have done. We've not made any additional changes other than the one change to the bed and breakfast, where we just went back to what we had before we did the 160D codification, which clarified that it's just a one-time permit and not a yearly registration. That's all we changed with that.
So basically what we're engaged in right here is I'll use my words, it's a procedural exercise. We as this commission has to adopt these so that City Council can adopt them. And there's really not a lot of flexibility. Is that my understanding?
Yes, sir. That is what our opinion is at this point, and the opinion of our outside legal counsel as well, is that we have to do this to comply with the court order. Whether we go and do anything additional in the future, we can consider at a later date, but we believe this is what we have to do right now.
So your comment about the legislature would imply to me that, you know, I wouldn't say this is a completely fluid situation, but things could change.
Yes, sir, and there are things going on with the legislature and all over the state regarding, you mentioned Airbnb and what we can do, what municipalities can do to regulate them. And there are just so many different things that are happening right now that's why our recommendation is to do what we have to do right now and wait and see how those things play out.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Commissioner Sharp?
But there is discretion in terms of the zoning categories upon which this applies. That's not, the court did not speak to all or nothing or any particular zoning district.
You mean the districts, sir? Yes, they did leave in place that you can zone.
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear that.
I'm sorry, they did leave in place that you can zone them out of whole specific districts if there's a reason to justify that. We had not done that previously other than in the mobile home districts, and they did not modify that.
So has there been discussion at any level of excluding the historic district residential?
There has been discussion of that among staff, but it is our recommendation to not make any additional restrictions right now, and we can have those discussions at a later date. But we would not recommend that from a legal perspective right now while there are so many things still up in the air.
Could you help me understand why not?
All I can really say is that because there are so many different things going on at the legislature with regard to Airbnb and what we might be able to do to regulate them in general, and there's also a question about whether we can show a particular disparate impact to, say, the historic district if these were to occur. And so if we're to look at that, and we've expressed this to Mr. Pollack as well, if we want to look at that, then you and City Council can give us direction to study that, but we would need to build up enough evidence over time to show that there's a basis for needing to do that in the historic district, or whatever district it was that you're looking to restrict them in. And we would need to get that evidence and have it before we would make those changes. Does that make sense?
Thank you. So how would we encourage the study and the accumulation of data as it impacts on particular zoning districts?
I would just say that you could make that recommendation through staff to city council, to the city manager's office, to encourage them to look at that. And that's certainly something that council could instruct us to do.
I wonder if if we asked staff to pursue this, would it take any further action?
It would just take staff's discussion with the city manager's office to get his instruction about how to proceed.
So there seems to be logic that there is a necessity to distinguish between zoning districts. And I wonder how we could not lose this analytical point of view as we move forward with this clarification because of the court order.
I'm not sure.
Well, what I'm saying is, assuming that we adopt this, which you've obviously redlined the old ordinance based upon court studies.
Yes, sir.
We all read them and they were in our packet. But it really doesn't get to some of the principal issues why we took this subject on 4 years ago. One way is that it impacts differently on subdivisions versus north side, south side, historic district. There are already issues of parking and density, and I'm hard pressed to think that we should have spent 4 years and simply let the main issues go forward. We understand registration is improper, and we understand that there's gaps in the distances, but I wonder whether we shouldn't continue to look at the impact this has on workforce housing, quality of life, historic district credibility, the whole idea that the city needs is not one homogeneous development district, but really a whole set of distinct neighborhoods.
Yes, sir, understood. And those issues like parking and insurance and trash and all of those things are still in place in the meantime. Even once you do this, there's still the provisions about having to have trash pickup and having to have insurance and having to have parking requirements. And there still are mechanisms for being able to enforce those through both the police department and through the zoning department. And all of those things will remain in place after you take this action tonight. And then it is possible in the future for staff to keep looking at other options depending on how things go in response to this particular court case.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Commissioner Lennon?
There was a comment that the HDR is unique because of the lack of HOA covenants. Is it fair to say there's thousands of homes in Wilmington that are not subject to HOA covenants?
Oh, yes, sir, definitely.
Okay, so I wanted to throw that out there. My point being is this is not an HDR specific issue. Is that fair?
That's correct. The same would be true for any district if we wanted to ban these in any district, whether it's the HDR or any other district. If we wanted to keep them out of anywhere in particular, we'd need to get evidence for why they were particularly adverse to any particular district. That would include studying police reports and noise complaints and any other violations, as well as complaints from neighbors. We would have to go through that process, and I would estimate it probably be a year or multi-year long process before we would be able to get enough information to make a solid recommendation for whatever district it is.
Thank you. And then the number was thrown out about 1,800 short-term rentals, and I apologize, you may not be the person, but is that right?
I'll let Ms. Thurston answer that one.
In our last report, and this is from April of this year, we had 772 properties identified by Host Compliance, our third-party software that's been monitoring these for the city. We had 273 of those that were listed as being in compliance, which means that they had obtained a permit in the year prior. 328 were non-compliant, and then there were 171 others that were just being investigated further by the company.
Thank you.
So 1,800 does seem a bit high.
Thank you. And then my last question is, I asked it before and Mr. Sharp asked it, but I just want to make sure this is crystal clear. If 50 bachelors rent a house and wreak havoc, they're subject to the same laws and regulations. Those are still in place. The police can be called. That situation can be addressed.
The situation could be addressed through WPD, Wilmington Police Department, or city zoning, because it would still be a violation of the zoning ordinance as well. And if it continues to occur, if the owner doesn't step in to bring the property into compliance, they would be subject to citations of $200 per day.
Thank you.
Could I do
What I'm
one?
hearing is that the issue isn't over by a long shot, but that our attorneys have spoken and made recommendations for us to go ahead and move this along to City Council, and I'm ready to do that. Our legal staff I take that very seriously, their recommendations, of course, but also keeping in mind that this is not the last time we'll see this issue. This is not the last time we'll make any kind of recommendation to City Council on this issue of short-term lodging. So thank you, staff, for all your hard work on this and for keeping an eye on this issue moving forward. What is the will of the commission on this? Commissioner Lennon?
Madam Chair, I'd like to make a motion for the approval of agenda item number 1, case number LDC 5622, the revisions to the short-term lodging ordinance. This request is reasonable and consistent with the objectives and policies of the following plans adopted by the City of Wilmington: the Create Wilmington Comprehensive Plan. Planning Commission considers its approval to be reasonable and in the public interest because the amendment reflects the changes necessary to bring the city's ordinance into conformance with the North Carolina Court of Appeals decision. Therefore, the Planning Commission recommends approval of this request.
Thank you. Commissioner Lennon has made a motion to approve agenda item number 1. Do we have a second?
I second.
Commissioner Pollack with the second. And we will do a roll call vote on this.
Before we do that, could I offer an amendment?
Not at this stage, no.
Why not?
Because the
The
motion and
seconds come through.
the seconds
It needs to be voted on.
I'm sorry, when would be the appropriate time to offer an amendment?
it would have been before the motion.
How could you know what the motion, how could you know that you wanted an amendment before you heard the motion?
Well, because we have to our staff report in the proposal?
I'm not disagreeing with the motion, I simply want to add as an amendment something to it. I questioned, could we have legal counsel on that, when the appropriate time to add an amendment to a resolution?
Discussion can occur prior to a motion, after the initial motion, but once a second's been made and the question's been called, then a vote's the proper procedure.
Fine.
All right, so we'll, alphabetical order. Commissioner Goins?
Aye.
Commissioner Lennon?
Aye.
Commissioner Lyle? Aye. Commissioner Pollack?
Aye.
Commissioner Sharp?
Aye.
And Commissioner Woodruff?
Aye.
And the motion passes unanimously, and agenda item number 1 is approved. Thank you. All right, next thing on our, did you want to add something to Commissioner Sharp?
I wonder whether I could ask to add a resolution asking that staff and council evaluate the impact of the ordinance for the next year. I understand the nature of the court ruling. I just think that we ought not to lose the initiative in terms of analyzing the impact. Would this be an appropriate time to offer this resolution?
Mr. Attorney?
The Planning Commission can't make a resolution. You can certainly express your desire to staff, which I believe you have, that they take a look at the issue and do a study on it, and that can certainly be passed on to council when they consider the item as well next month.
Commissioner Sharp, I'll be sure to add a comment in the notes from the Planning Commission meeting that you had made such a request.
Fine.
And
Okay.
just for clarification, is this to specifically look at the HDR and the HD, or all
Yeah,
different
I-
residential districts?
Just the diversity of neighborhoods and community in Wilmington. That's what we need to analyze. I appreciate your comment. And at some time, I guess I need a clarification on Robert's rules of when to do an appropriate amendment to a resolution.
Certainly, and I apologize about that. Happy to talk with you about that.
Thank you.
Madam Chair,
Commissioner Lennon?
just two things. One, Mr. Sharp, I would say respectfully, the Wilmington Police Department already does this. They already track calls and responses to incidents. So I think want to make sure I'm understanding, are you asking that that be done citywide or specifically for a certain neighborhood in the city?
First of all, the city police respond to calls, okay? If there are no calls, then there is no response.
Nor is there a way to measure
Okay,
an incident?
what I'm asking from not an enforcement rule, I'm asking that we evaluate our ordinance so that we know whether we are negatively impacting any strategic neighborhoods as part of our general UDO. Okay?
I think another way, let me restate what I think you're asking is basically saying, look, we've just passed a motion and we've adopted, the changes as dictated by the court. I think all you're asking is the staff to go back and take a look that says, based on what we heard tonight about the historic district as an example, should there be any exceptions? Could there be any exceptions?
Commissioner Pollock, I'm going to need you to talk into your microphone, please.
Again, I always laugh. I've never been accused of not being heard. I think all
You just
you're-
move in a different direction.
How's that?
Better.
Does that work? Great, okay. No, I think all you're asking is we've just spread it across all the districts as in the motion. You just wanting the staff to go back and take a look. Are there any exceptions based on further examination that says, hey, we maybe ought to go back and accept this area or this area because of? I think that's all you're asking, right?
Yeah. I'm asking to take stock on our actions periodically and to see whether what we apply works. If it doesn't work, then let's reconsider it. If it works, good. Okay, I just think there is a process by which we need to do some self-evaluation after 4 or 5 years of continual discussion and an apparent differential impact on types of neighborhood. Okay, if you have a large subdivision of single-family houses, there may not be any real parking issues there, and that's fine. If you are talking about a very dense area, then there may be evaluations, and the neighbors may not be able to know what the cause of their parking constraints are. How would you know? We know that when there's a venue going on downtown, we expect there be parking along the city streets. That's understandable. If it's a reoccurring thing where there is congestion only over the weekend in your neighborhood, do you complain to the police? There's no basis of complaint. There is a basis of discomfort and dislocation of the neighborhood. So What I'm trying to do is find a way of doing some self-assessment. And Mr. Pollack, I really appreciate your expressing my low-key attempt to be self-analytical.
Ms. Thurston, will the third-party software continue to monitor the websites that track, the short-term lodging websites? Will that be continued?
It was included in this year's budget because it was still uncertain what would be required as we were developing the ordinance. We've discussed with the city manager's office, but we haven't received specific direction to discontinue the contract with that third-party software, but we will certainly be having those conversations.
Okay. I guess what I'm getting at is it possible for us to know if we track the crime or the parking or the noise complaints? Is that something we can compare with will we still know, even after the registration and permitting is gone, will we still know where they are to help with that analysis?
We would just know based on investigations at this point. I mean, we would have the core list of the ones that are operating now and some basic assumption that a lot of those are going to continue to operate, but we believe surely that there will be more once the separation requirements are no longer an issue, which they're already not being enforced any longer.
That's a safe assumption.
I will also add that as we were developing the ordinance originally, and it was a longer than 3-year process, we did take a look at crime and trash issues and noise complaints and parking issues in the different districts, and there was some consideration as we were developing the ordinance for having the separation requirement be greater within the historic districts, but the evidence did not really show a disparate impact on the HDR or the HD versus other residential districts, and so City Council decided not to have a different separation requirement there based on the evidence that was available at that time. That's not to say that things haven't changed in the time since the ordinance was adopted.
Thank you. All right, we'll move on to items from the commission. And at this time, I would like to introduce our new planning director who just started yesterday. So thank you for making it out to meet everyone tonight. And I'll read a little bit about Ms. Linda Painter. She has over 25 years of experience in both the public and private sectors. Prior to joining the city, she served as the Director of Planning and Development for the town of Mansfield, Connecticut, Deputy Director of Planning and Policy for the City of Providence, and Chief Planner Zoning Official for the City of Orlando. Linda has worked on a variety of planning projects throughout her career, including the development of new comprehensive plans for Providence and Mansfield, and the development of zoning regulations for all 3 municipalities. Linda also has experience with large-scale development projects such as redevelopment of the Orlando Naval Training Center with a mixed-use neighborhood. Linda's received a Master of Science in Community and Regional Planning and a Bachelor of Arts in Government from the University of Texas at Austin. Would you like to say a few words?
Thank you very much. I am very excited to be here. This is an incredible opportunity, and I think this is a fabulous team. One of the things that attracted me to the city was the work that you've already done in terms of the comprehensive plan and the land development code, and just seeing how progressive you are and really committed to placemaking and neighborhoods and doing things in a way that will just improve the city for generations to come. And I'm excited to be a part of that. I look forward to working with all of you.
Great, thank you. Anything else from the commission?
Yeah,
Commissioner Pollack?
I have a favor to ask. Is it possible to get the packet for the August 3rd, is that the next meeting? For the August 3rd meeting, is it possible to get that packet by close of business on the prior Wednesday? And I ask only because I'm going out of town and I'd love to print it off and have some light reading in the car for the 12-hour trip.
Mr. Pollack, when you mentioned this to me the other day,
I told you we'll do our best, and I'm glad you put this out here. I think we talked about you would make the suggestion or request at the meeting because you will be out. We'll do our best. At the time, I think we were thinking there were 6 or 7 cases. I believe we're down to about 3 or 4 cases now to move forward in August. So that is probably more feasible today than it was last week when we were talking.
And you know what, I'll take what you have. I just,
Sure.
you know, it would just help me at least, so when I get back that Monday night, I'll
We'll
go out and
do
look
our
at the
best.
properties Tuesday and whatever.
It's noted. We will do our best to make that commitment. And if we give it to you, we want to make sure it's available to all the commissioners.
Sure.
But we'll keep that in mind, and I'll share that with the planners who are working on their case summaries. Maybe we can get it out a day or 2 earlier.
Appreciate your help on that matter. Thank you so
Yes, sir,
much.
you're welcome.
Thank you. Items from the staff.
Anything additional from staff?
Okay. All right, if there's nothing else, I will entertain a motion to adjourn. Commissioner Woodruff?
Move to adjourn.
And do we have a second?
Second.
Second, Mr. Pollack, and we'll do a voice vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Anyone opposed? Thank you. We are adjourned.